Good morning. I'm Celisa Steele.
And I'm Jeff Cobb.
And we're very glad to be here this morning, very glad that all of you are here this morning. For those of you who were at the Symposium last year, thank you for coming back again. For those of you who are new this year, welcome. We are looking really forward to spending the next 2 days with this group, really focused on how we can improve the reach, revenue, and impact of what we do in our learning businesses.
And so we thought maybe a good way to start off this year would be to talk a little bit about what's happened since last year, set a little bit of context, and we just wanted to highlight a few kind of continuing trends and events that are going on out there in the whole business and market for lifelong learning, continuing education, and professional development. One of the really good pieces of news that we got this year was from the Pew Internet Research Center, the Pew Research Center, who did a study of Americans regarding their lifelong learning habits. And we found out that 73% of people identify themselves as lifelong learners. Certainly very good news for us. 74% of those from Pew's standpoint.
Jeff, is this North America only, or is this global? Can you tell me the scope?
This is purely America. It's purely America. Yeah, good question. So in the United States, so Infocom unfortunately doesn't have the international statistics on this, but in the United States, 73% of people identify as lifelong learners. 74% of those identify as what Pew characterizes as personal learners, so they're doing things to help develop themselves in their personal lives. And another 63% identify as professional learners, so those who are actually in the workforce are consistently doing things to improve themselves from a professional standpoint. So that's good news. I think it's what we all suspected in the first place, or you felt that things were heading in that direction. And one of the things that's happening out there that I'm sure you've all tuned in to some extent as a result is there's kind of a race at this point out there to reach these people in a variety of different ways. And we saw a continuation of significant investment activity in the lifelong learning sector and ed tech in general this year. But for example, Udemy, which is a company that really harvests the talents of subject matter experts to put a full catalog out there for people to come and sign up for courses. They passed the $10 million learner mark earlier this year, so more than 10 million people learning there, and they just raised, another $60 million round. This is on top of tens of millions of dollars that they already have raised. How many people are familiar with Udemy in the room? How many people have actually visited the Udemy site? How many people have actually enrolled in something at Udemy? Okay, so significant minority that have actually tried it out. Try this out. Udemy's not the only one. Udacity, which is one of the big MOOC providers, has sort of shifted its focus more towards what it calls nano degrees. In its last round of funding, it was valued at around $1 billion. It's a huge amount of money for an education company. And many smaller startups are raising all sorts of money. Depending on who you talk to, this sort of market right now is anywhere from 120 billion to 200 billion and expected to grow to 500 billion. Now, this room is serving only a portion of that overall market, but it is a big market. It is big business. And one of the reasons that the reason that I emphasize this is not so much to discourage everybody who's sitting around saying, well, I don't have $60 million and I can't go out and raise $60 million. It's more, one, just simply to point out the enormous opportunity that is out there right now, and we're all working in this field of opportunity together. But I also wanted to emphasize that the game has changed to a significant extent. I would say that probably most of us in this room are playing what you could call a finite game, which is that the rules are known, the players are known. You basically play the game to win. You do your annual meeting every year, you run your seminars, you get as many registrations as you can, you make as much money as you can. Most of these companies are playing what you would call an infinite game. The rules are not so clear. You don't even know all of the players necessarily. And the point is to stay in the game for the long haul. You're playing for the long term. Now, a lot of these companies, maybe not these specifically, but a lot of the ed tech startups are out there are going to go away. We saw it happen in the mid-90s with the original ed tech boom. A lot of them just implode. But some of them are playing that infinite game, and they'll be playing it well. And in the end, they will stay in the game, and because of that, they will win. And so I think one of the first charges to this group would be to sit back and reflect and ask ourselves, are we investing for an infinite game? Or are we still playing that finite game? Because if you're playing a finite game in a highly disrupted market, well, my money's on the infinite players. So we should all at this point be investing for that infinite game.
And so at the same time that you have all of this growth in lifelong learning, this recognition of people identifying as lifelong learners, you also have tremendous change happening in technology. We have a lot of growth in artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things and virtual reality. Things have changed over the recent years, really over just the recent months, and it seems like the pace of change is just going to keep growing. The technology is going to keep evolving, keep changing things. So I don't think that courses are going to go away anytime soon, but I think more than ever we have to question, what does it make sense to learn? Therefore, what does it make sense for us to teach when machines know so much? When you have artificial intelligence out there, when you have a teaching assistant who in an online course is actually artificial intelligence and nobody can really tell the difference, what does that mean then in terms of how we support learning, what we teach, what we focus on? Similarly, once we figure out, okay, this is what it makes sense to teach, this is what it makes sense for us to focus on learning, well then once you have in your toolkit things like virtual reality, when you have that ability to really create simulations for people to really be immersed in an experience without necessarily actually having to experience that experience, that they're able to do it virtually, what does that mean? What does that mean for how we teach, for the experience that we're giving to learners? And then with the Internet of Things, as we're having more real-time data available to us, how can we make sure that we're pulling that in so that we're giving the learners what they need? And so the question here to consider is, are we looking across time? So are we aware of what is happening and the trajectory? Are we looking forward? So we're not just mired in the today, are we looking across time?
And then finally, another thing that continued to evolve this year was the focus on workforce, what work looks like now, how we're preparing people for the workforce of the future. And academia, higher education continue to take quite a bit of heat. People are questioning the value of college degrees, questioning whether it's really worth it to spend all of that time and all of that money when it appears that people aren't necessarily coming out as prepared as they could and should be to be a part of the workforce going forward. But academia isn't sitting still. We saw all sorts of activity around higher education institutions looking at alternative credentialing, in particular, badging, certificate programs, investing a great deal in that. We saw a lot of collaborative work between higher education and corporations to look at what needs to be done about the workforce. So, a really healthy ferment going on around workforce education. But I think this year there also emerged more of an understanding than there's been in the past that we're dealing with a fundamentally different landscape. People are in the workforce much longer. When they come out, they're basically going to have what we characterize as the other 50 years in front of them, and being able to provide meaningful education across that time period is becoming a more focused issue. And we feel like we saw more of a recognition of there essentially being a third sector of education out there and being defined as more of a third sector of education out there that is the lifelong learning sector, that is the continuing education and professional development sector. And so, a question that we would pose related to this is, how does the value that we offer span those other 50 years? Are we really thinking about that, and are we thinking about ourselves as a major force and a major voice in this third sector of education that's so vital now in our global learning economy? So those are some of the highlights from this past year that we just wanted to put out as a context for the beginning of this event, to set a little bit of a backdrop, and again, from the perspective of there just being a tremendous opportunity out there that everybody in this room is engaged in. And as we look across time, as we think about playing that infinite game, as we think about the value that we create in those other 50 years, I think the conversations and the discussions that we're going to be able to have over the next 2 days are really going to help us all to succeed with answering those questions in a successful way.